Hey guys, it's me, EODGamer here, and today we're back with another team composition video, and we have Yanqing. Yanqing is actually quite well requested by you guys, be it maybe he's your pull target, or perhaps you actually pulled him already and you want to just figure out what kind of team composition he works very well in. This video is going to answer both of them, and we are going to cover all options ranging from free to play, and towards the end of the video we'll go into more gacha and like more whale comps. But do stick around to the end as there's something for everyone, and I'm sure you can learn a thing or two, especially when more characters are going to be added into the game. There's certainly value for all of you as well. Before we dive into the free-to-play team comp, the most important thing to know about Yanqing is a single target damage dealer that has a lot of crit rate in the passives as well as abilities already. What this means is many of the time you're going to probably be over-capping on crit, but that also means that you'll be able to utilize a lot of crit damage very early on in terms of the game. I do think that Yanqing is probably one of the most efficient characters in the early to mid game, and probably players with this character will be clearing much quicker than a lot of other players who are mainly running with, for example, Zilla. If you guys are interested in the differences between Yanqing and Zilla, I already have a Hun comparison video which I already put up on the channel. You guys can check it out. But for this video, we are specifically looking at Yanqing. And for those of you who don't know, the most important thing about Yanqing in terms of team composition is helping him have his passive uptime, and that is to avoid him taking any damage. And of course, in terms of total free-to-play options, you have two choices. One is Fire MC, and your second option is March 7. So in this sense, March 7 might be a better option if you want a slightly thicker shield, but then again, March 7 draws aggro to the person that she is shielding, so that is one downside to that. Putting the shield on Yanqing and then also to prevent him from taking damage is kind of a bit contradicting, because he would be taking damage later on as well. But if your enemy is going to hit AoE damage anyway and it's big enough, then again it doesn't really matter who the aggro target is on if all units are being targeted as well. Fire MC is a better choice in terms of AoE protection, and she draws the aggro instead and taking away a lot of pressure off of Yanqing. But one thing to know is Fire MC's shield is of course much thinner compared to a lot of the other defender classes as well. And in terms of slot tree, since you already have a Hun character, a character like Yanqing, which I've recommended in a lot of other videos, might not be as applicable because you don't want to run two double single target damage dealers. In this case, you can run a lot of other AoE attackers. For example, you can run Herta, you can run Serval, as well you can run Qingque. These three are more or less interchangeable in terms of like free-to-play starter options. You could choose a different element from Ice, because if you have Ice from Herta, you have Ice from March 7 and Yanqing, you kind of be doubling down on Ice. So maybe this will be like the super low priority, and you can choose between Lightning or Quantum depending on what you really want. In my opinion, I think Serval is much easier to play, much more simpler in terms of her mechanics. Qingque takes a while to get used to the RNG in terms of her Mahjong Tao's passive as well, and uses up a lot more skill points. So it really depends on what you are looking for. But these two, I think you can't really go wrong, especially in a free-to-play team. The last slot, of course, is you could have a dedicated attack buffer, for example like Asta, who gives a lot of attack buffs to both your slot 1 and slot 3. Of course, another option is to run a double healer or double defensive unit, and you can run Natasha together with Fire MC to get a bit more defensive position, especially if we're going up against harder fights. Yanqing does a lot of damage, and you shouldn't be afraid of running like a double defensive unit, especially in the early to mid game, because he will carry most of the damage for your team as well with his high crit rate stats. And that's the total free-to-play team. Now let's add a little bit of gacha and talk about the 4-star gacha characters. What if you maybe put on the banner and you got a little couple more 4 stars? Who's going to be actually good for Yanqing? The first person that comes to mind definitely will be a character like Tingyun. Why Tingyun is because most Hun characters like Yanqing, Susang, as well as Zilla, they all have some sort of speed up buff already and are already moving pretty fast. So they don't really rely on Asta's speed buff in that sense. And especially if you're running Yanqing as more of like a carry kind of damage dealer, you can always opt for someone with a bit more energy restoration, as well as utilizing the attack, solid attack bars, and utilizing a Hun character's already very high attack stat, so that she can also do damage on the side as well. Very solid character in terms of gacha 4 stars. Of course, you can choose between them depending on what you want. Going with Asta implies that your slot 3 is going to be a bit more relevant. Going with Tingyun means that you're more like doubling down on a particular character depending on what you prefer. Of course, at this point, you could always run for another option is, for example, going with Pella. But of course, Pela's option, defense shredding in the 4th slot, will mean that you are running with quite a lot of ice characters, a double ice character in Pela and Yanqing already. Esta does offer a bit more fire break damage, of course drinks a little bit of skill points, but also at least diversifies up your elements in a little bit. Now let's talk real quick about the whale comp, and what I mean by whale is really like adding on another 5-star, be it like a standard 5-star or limited 5-star. I call it whale, not really whale, because lucky free to plays do get to this point if you play for a longer period of time. But generally, if you are like in your first 1 to 2 weeks of Honkai Star Rail, you probably won't have access to like multiple 5-star characters. If you do, congratulations as well. But anyway, let's look at the first character that works really well with Yanqing and synergizes the best with him. And of course, it's a character like Gepard. Gepard works very well because it keeps up Yanqing's uptime on its passive. And just remember that Yanqing's passive adds about 20% crit rate and 30% crit damage if the passive is up, and it goes away when he takes damage. This is very massive and is a significant boost to Yanqing's damage output, and that is why you really want to try to protect this character as much as you can. The main weakness, of course, is mainly AoE attacks, and Gepard solves a lot of the AoE attacks by protecting in terms of shielding the whole party. Running a double ice is never comfortable in terms of utility. You can only fight a lot of ice, and you definitely are looking for other characters in your 3rd and 4th slot that diversify away a bit from the ice element. For example, you could run Serval in this slot here, in slot 3, so you get some ice, you get some fire, and your last slot can be, for example, a character like Esta to give you a bit more fire breaking and a bit more damage buffing in the last slot. At least you get a triple element diversified break kind of style to play. Gepard is very strong. I think he's probably one of the better ones for Yanqing, especially to get the uptime. Another character that you can play if you are not interested in Gepard will be, of course, a character like Clara. Clara works in a similar fashion because she draws the aggro to herself and distracts the enemy a bit. One of the downsides running Clara instead of Gepard is that in terms of AoE damage, Yanqing might still take a little bit of damage and remove the empathetic sword passive that he has as well. So that's the key downside. But Clara, by drawing aggro and provides a little bit more of like AoE damage in terms of a splash and also strong physical damage, is another solid option that you can consider playing in terms of like a double standard character. You can swap Serval out and put in a more defensive character. For example, you could play maybe Natasha in the 3rd slot to provide a little bit more healing as well. You could either run Esta to buff up both of them, because if you're running Esta, you bump up your whole team, or you could even run Tingyun when you need to choose between which one do you want to buff. And of course, another character that works really well with, in terms of standard character with Yanqing, is definitely going to be a character like Himiko. Himiko provides that AoE damage that Yanqing doesn't offer, and also a very, very solid character to work very well with a character like Esta, who already works pretty well with Yanqing as well. The key downside, of course, in this team composition is you don't have a shielder unless you swap out maybe Natasha for Fire MC, for example. Then you get a little bit of shielding, you get a triple fire to capitalize on Esta's buff in terms of fire damage, and you get a bit of shielding, not very thick shield, but still enough to maybe mitigate 1 or 2 AoE attacks, especially with the aggro draw from Fire MC and the aggro down. It doesn't get as much aggro. He has a reduced aggro when his passive is up. It might also help you mitigate a lot of damage and allow his passive uptime. If you are a bit scared in terms of not confident about the shielding of Fire MC, you could of course run Natasha in the 4th slot and sacrifice a bit on the damage buffing potential in that sense. So you get like a double defensive unit to be able to like buff up or sustain your characters, as these two characters really do quite a bit of damage already on their own. And now let's talk about some limited 5-star characters that will work really well with Yanqing. And the first character that comes to mind, of course, is a character like Jingyuan. Jingyuan works really well with characters like Tingyun and, for example, Esta already, as he is more of a hyper carry kind of style. Yanqing is relatively more independent, as he buffs himself up in terms of speed, has very good ice damage on the side with already very solid crit rate and crit damage multipliers, especially early on in the game from his passives as well. So very independent character. It's really similar to Susang in a sense where you don't really need too much support from a lot of your team members and can be plug and play. This makes him work really well with a hyper carry Jingyuan who wants most of the damage buffing. In that sense, it allows you to play a character like Tingyun who can be dedicated to buff Jingyuan a little bit more. You could run Fire MC or even Gepard in this slot to provide just a bit more shielding for the whole team. Or of course you could run Natasha in this slot as well, just to provide that sustain for the rest of your team. One of the downsides of running a healer or fire MC is of course the AoE damage you're still weak to, because the empathetic swords might disappear. Esta also works really fine, and by running Esta you're actually focusing more on like team-wide damage, as well as bringing also fire MC and adding some fire break damage into the team composition. Blade is going to work really solid as well, because Blade offers you that AoE damage, and he's also pretty independent, and Blade also likes to work with, for example, a good shielder. So in that case, you can run Gepard, you can run Blade, you can run Yanqing, and of course an attack buffer in the last slot. With the solid shield Gepard provides, Gepard actually benefits both wind DPS, ice DPS, works really well in this team. If you want to run like a husbando team composition, this will work pretty well. I'm quite confident with this team as well. And in the last slot, if you really want to max out your husbando team, you really could go well in the last slot. So you're running Yanqing, a single target damage dealer, Blade, an AoE damage dealer who already has some lifesteal in his kit. You can run Gepard with a very thick shield, and Welt who debuffs the enemy in terms of movement speed. So even though you don't get that speed buff and attack buff, but the amount of damage that they do combined together with the speed down really reduces a lot of strain on your team. And Welt does offer quite a bit amounts of AoE damage as well. And you have 3 different elements if you play a roster like this into these 2 characters as well. And of course, if you want to run like a semi-waifu team, you could always run Kafka in the second slot together with Yanqing. Kafka is more of a DPS unit in terms of an AoE DPS rather than her role that states like nihility. She does offer some debuffing, but if you build her very well for speed and attack, she also does very solid damage on the side. With her passive follow-up attack, it also does decent amounts of single target damage also. Very solid character that I will be probably doing a more dedicated video on how to build teams around her. But this is an example of a team that works really well. I've done on the channel already a showcase of this exact team, just Yanqing swapping for Zealer. You can check it out as a Zealer and Kafka team. I think somewhere on the channel, go ahead and check it out as well to see how it works in action. But this team is extremely solid. You have good single target, good AoE damage with good sustain and attack buffing for the whole team. You have good elements in terms of lightning, ice, fire in terms of break damage, and a good solid well-rounded comp as well. And if you want to see more of such team composition videos, do check out these 2 other videos right here. Like and subscribe for more of such future content, and see you in the next video.